Okay, so today's video is going to be another 1-point perspective video, and what we're going to do is we're going to take the idea that we used last session to create these 4 objects, and we're going to use a single vanishing point. Again, this is 1-point perspective, and I'm going to draw a box where we'll maybe look down inside it and we'll put a lid above it using 1-point perspective. This time I'm going to move the vanishing point from the middle off to one side, and we'll raise it slightly up above the middle point. So I'm going to kind of estimate a dot about there, and what we'll do is we'll draw the box on the bottom left hand side. So once we've got those measurements done, we can kind of rough things in a little bit, and we'll go step by step. So I hope you're okay following along, and we'll get started. So again, you're going to need a sharp pencil, and you're going to need a rule. I'm using a steel rule just because that's what I've got handy, but a normal ruler would be good. A long rule is important though. You can't use a little short one from a maths kit. Okay, so we're going to come down, and I'm going to put a vanishing point about there. I'll put a measurement in there now. Okay, so that is, let's come down to 6 centimeters. That's 60 mil, and I'm going right to the edge there. Okay, so that was 6 cm, which in DT and engineering terms is 60 millimeters. Okay, that's on the right hand side of the page, and I'm going to just check my alignment there. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to draw the front face of the object. Now if I just sketch this in a little bit, you can see where I'm going with that, and what we'll do is we'll then put some measurements on it. I think the reason for using measurements is so that you can follow along. If you were sketching this by hand, that would be absolutely fine to just kind of to do it a little bit freehand according to your own designs. But for me to make it easier for you guys to follow along, I'm going to give you these measurements, and I would suggest on our first lesson that we follow those. So I'm going to come across, you can't see it on my ruler there, but that's 20 millimeters. That's 2 centimeters, 20 mil. You don't need to write those numbers. And I'm going to come up, might as well come up by the same amount, 20 mil. Okay, so that gives me my first corner of my object. So if that was a square, that would be 20 mil by 20 mil. All right, now what we'll do is we'll come up from there by, I think, 60, which is 6 centimeters is a pretty good number. So I'm drawing parallel with this edge. I'm coming up 6 centimeters. You could, if you've got a set square, you could set that up along the bottom of the page and draw vertically straight up. I don't have that with me, and I think we'll just keep to basic equipment, so I'm not going to bother with that. Now, the bottom line, we're going to come along horizontally, parallel with the bottom edge, and we'll do that. I think, again, I'm going to follow this line to, looking at mine, that's quite a nice, neat measurement, 110 mil, that's 11 centimeters, and I'm going to just draw that line in nice and dark. Now, as I said, this is going to be a box with a possibly an open top, depending on how we get on. Now, what I'm going to do here, rather than measuring and getting my lines all wonky, I'm going to concentrate on getting these 2 lines parallel. So I'm just going to draw a line lightly. Just check my camera, see what you can see. Yeah, so just draw that lightly. And then what I will do is measure onto that line. It's quite a good way of just getting things right. So I project my line up and down, getting it at the right angle first of all. And if you remember, this one was 60 millimeters there. That one is 60 millimeters there. So now I can join that up, and that gives me a rectangle. So there's my front face of my box. Now I'm going to go off to this vanishing point here. This is VP1. We're doing 1-point perspective, so we're going to go to VP1. And from each of these corners, we will go to that vanishing point. Now I'm going to draw darker than I would like you to, so that you can see it. Remember, you're always drawing as lightly as you possibly can, so that you can see your lines, but you don't have to spend ages rubbing them out. And I'm checking that I'm going from my corner to my vanishing point. I'm doing a double check before I do my line, and then I'm drawing that line in. Okay, and you can see here why you need this long ruler. You can't just do this with a short ruler, because otherwise you'll come unstuck. It needs to be a long one that can go the entire distance in one hit. Okay, so this is my front face. So if you imagine that we've got a box, this is my front face here. I've now just drawn that side face there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this top face here next. All right, so I'm going to measure back along this corner, and again, I would probably just estimate this if it was me, but I'm going to give you a measurement so that you can follow along. If you're having a practice at home, you maybe want to try these measurements slightly differently. I think we'll come to 8 centimeters along the bottom. Okay, now don't be tempted to measure 8 centimeters along the top line, because that will give you it will give you the wrong perspective, because the shape slants and becomes a little bit distorted in perspective. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my back edge is parallel with my front edge. So there's the back edge there. It's got to be parallel with that. If your line is wonky, this is a common mistake. If those two aren't lined up properly, it's going to look absolutely shocking. So what I was saying is that what you can do is to put your pencil down. This is the trick that I've shown you before. Put your pencil down on the front line and line your rule up so that it's parallel with the pencil. Sometimes that makes it easier. It doesn't always, but that's worth a shot. Check that. That parallel is important. Okay, so there's that line there. Now, that gives me my back edge of my box. So again, if I've got my vertical there and then it goes horizontally, I know that this one has got a vertical and it's going to go horizontally. So I'm going to be really careful to check that this line is parallel. I don't need to do any measurement now because I know where my line is. I'm going to make sure we're lined up with that corner. I'm going to make sure that I'm parallel between those two angles there. Oop. I'm going to draw that line in. I'm going to make that quite dark because that line is staying. And what I'm then going to do is I'm going to darken in this case, these lines to make the box. And you should see now that we've got a lovely 3D cuboid. Now, I could do a whole series of these following that same perspective. I'll do you a little sketch one at the back just to show you the idea. So I could use the same sort of principle to create a another set of cuboids going off to the same vanishing point of maybe slightly different proportions, but they'll all be in line, a bit like the buildings at the side of a road or something. Okay, so there's my object. Now what I'm going to do before I go any further is I'm going to draw a lid for this object. Before I cut out the top of it, I'm going to draw a lid. Now my lid is going to come above this line here, but I'm going to line it up with these vertical lines. So I take that vertical, I'm going to just plot it up the page. You'll notice I'm not doing any measurement there, but hopefully you can see how light my line is, and all the work that I did making sure that they were parallel earlier is going to pay off a little bit now. Okay, so I've got a line there, a line there, and a line there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the lid of my box a random size. I'm not going to measure that at all. If you wanted to measure that, that's probably 15 to 18 mil. But what I'm not doing, look, I'm not at the edge of the page. I'm nice and high up, a couple of mil off, 4 or 5 mil off. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot that line back to the vanishing point, and I'm going to plot that forwards as a rectangle. Okay, so I'll see what we'll do. We'll do the rectangle first. So I'm going to make sure that I'm parallel with I'm using the edge of my page as my reference now. And this will give me my front face rectangle. So if you're doing some design work, quite often it's amazing how many objects are based on boxy shapes. Shelving units, furniture, but even things like, if you think about a mobile phone is not much more than a rectangle with slightly rounded corners. So the rectangle is really important. So that's my front face there, that's my front face of the lid. If I now come from each of my 3 corners to that vanishing point. So not much measurement on this top one because I'd done all that work a minute ago. Okay, so that was my front line there. That was this front line here. I've gone to the vanishing point. This is my back edge. And then all I've got to do is to do the back edge here. Underneath that. Starts at this corner. So I find that corner here. Have a little bit of a look. And check that I'm running parallel. Horizontal in this case. Check I've got that parallel. And then draw that line in. Okay. Now if you get to this point and you've managed to draw that shape or something like it, then well done. I think the real trick with perspective is to hold your nerve a little bit and follow the rules. Always go into your vanishing point. Always, unless there's a reason, always keeping your lines parallel with each other. Looking at measurement maybe off the edge of a page, or what if we were measuring from zero or an edge, we might call it a datum. And that gives me that shape. Now, what I'm going to do finally on this to create our final shape, because this is a box and we need to be able to look into it, is we're going to define our interior space. And all I'm going to do, I'll do you a little measurement so that we're getting this right. So I'm going to come in 15 millimeters. So that's 1.5 centimeters. And I'm going to come in over here at 1.5 centimeters, 15 millimeters. All right, so there's my two marks, and you'll see the effective perspective here. This one, I'm going to aim for my perspective to my vanishing point up here, but I'm only going to draw it in my box this time. Look, so I'm not going beyond the back of my box. And then again from this one, making sure I go to that vanishing point, do that double check, and I'm only going to draw in that box. All right. Now, if you look at this, those two measurements are exactly the same, 15 millimeters and 15 millimeters. But look at the difference in the depth of these two lines. That one's much wider than that one. And that's the effective perspective. You haven't done anything wrong. That's the effective perspective. And that's where I say you got to trust the method. They look very different. And as things get further away, or as the perspective gets exaggerated, that becomes more and more obvious. All right, but we've done it right. We've measured 15 mil and 15 mil. We've gone to our vanishing point, therefore we can trust it's right. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to measure back. Because this corner is very close to the same dimension, I'm going to come in at 15 mil there. So that's our measurement. I can't measure here because that would be a different size. So what I'm going to do is to really be careful to make sure that I'm running parallel with this front corner here. So there's the front corner. I'm going to run parallel with that. And again, I'm just going to draw in my box. So there we go. There's the front face top, side top, left-hand side top. Now, if I did 15 mil from the back here, it's going to look really, really weird, because as it gets further away, it should get smaller. So I'm going to make an estimate here. I reckon that's going to be about 6 millimeters. Let's have a look. Yeah, 6 mil. There's 5 mil for me. 6 or 7 millimeters, doesn't really matter. Okay, but I'm measuring from that back corner, 6 or 7 mil. And then again, because I'm working parallel, remember, I'm going to slide my rule down until I meet that line and draw that all the way across. Okay, so now look, here's our rectangle in the top. So I really want, I'm going to just make some dots here. You don't need to make these dots. I really want those points there. So make sure you can spot those. And some of you might have noticed we're only one line off finished now. Let's just darken those in again, because those are keepers. I'm not going where they cross over. I'm only going between those dots now. Okay, so this is my top face. Right hand side front face. In here, I'm missing this vertical line. And some of you might have spotted that. That's my back inside corner. When I do this, hopefully, you'll really see that shape. So I'm just checking where my line is here, because I want it to be parallel with this front corner. It's a vertical line, so it stays vertical. That's where I'm coming from. If you look on your shape, it's this corner here. And I'm coming straight down until I meet the next face. Right, let me show you another error that people make. They'll go, oh, hang on, that line needs to go there. It doesn't. It's a vertical line. So it stays vertical. So now, hopefully, if you've done this the same as me, you'll see your shape really obviously. Now you could stop there. I'm going to just put a little bit of colour on this, and I'll do some shading, and hopefully it'll turn out looking okay. I'm just having a quick look down on my camera there. All right, so the way I'm going to work it, this face is inside, it's going to be quite dark. This face is facing the same direction, so it's going to be quite dark. This face is facing the same direction as those two faces, so it's going to be quite dark. This face here is pointing down, it's probably going to be darkest, and this face here is going to be reasonably light. The lightest face for me today is going to be this top bit here. So I'm going to put my first coat down on that by just being really gentle with my pencil. And again, this is where I say it on any of my videos, although you see me sometimes going quite quickly, the more time you take on this, the less time you have worrying about whether your drawing's any good, because you get it right first time. So do it softly and build it up layer by layer. Now, I don't know whether you'll be able to see that on a camera, but I can see it. Now again, I'm going to just come in here, give myself a line. This is one of my darker faces, so I can afford to go reasonably heavy first of all. I try and shade in the same direction, but I'm okay. If I need to move my pencil or my paper, I will do. Go over it a couple of times. Now I want this face and this face to be the same sort of shading. So I'm going to do those at about the same time. Now sometimes it's quite a long reach with your colouring pencils, and it's worth practicing being, again, a little bit brave and just going for it, and then maybe go in the opposite direction or go another way to make sure that all of your white areas are filled up. This is probably still not as dark as I want to get, but that gives me a dark face, a light face. This is my medium face. Now depending on how medium I can get this is going to help me decide how dark I make my other faces. So this one and this one are facing in the same direction. You can see I've kind of lost my contrast between these faces, so I'm going to have to go over those again. This is the biggest face. This is a bit of a long bit of shading. I'll probably go over this 2, maybe 3 times. Now I'm deliberately not turning my page around very much so that it doesn't confuse you guys on the camera, but quite often I'd be rotating the page to make sure that my hands are working as comfortably as possible. So when you're doing this, feel free to turn your page a little. Right, so this is my third pass, and it's probably as dark as I'll go with this. Okay, now for me, this side and this side are definitely not dark enough, but I'm not going to do anything yet, because what I'm going to do is just very quickly colour in this top one. So this face here and these two faces here are facing the same way, so they're going to be about the same amount of darkness. This face and this face are facing the same way, so they're going to be a kind of a medium tone. Okay, now my darkest tone on this whole drawing is going to be the underside, which I was a little bit scruffy there with my shading. So this one is going to be the darkest of all. I'm not going to try and do it as dark as I can in one go. I'm going to do this in a series of passes. Okay, now where possible, I think I've reached the limits of this pencil. Where possible, you want to avoid using a different coloured pencil. It's very tempting to go, oh, that's in shadow, I'm going to go with black. You might use a slightly different darker blue there, but it's where possible, what you want to do is to build your tones using the colouring pencil that you've got. And I'm looking at that and thinking, actually, I'm going to come in a little bit darker here, if I can. Yeah, there's a little bit of room. And just work your way through it. This is interior, so it's probably going to be another quite dark area. And you'll notice that I've built this up now. It's probably taken me about as long to shade this object, if not longer, as it took me to draw it in the first place. And if you're feeling like you've absolutely nailed this, which a lot of you will have done, draw yourself some little shapes in the background and have another go at shading. Okay, now I'm not going to go much further than that, just for speed, and I have probably reached the limits of my colouring pencil. All I'm just doing here, I'm just darkening in that very bottom edge. Now again, if your hands are a bit wobbly, you can do this with a rule. And just put it there and just run a nice little edge, darken it in. And if you want to make it stand out, you can also, like we've done before, just give it a contrasting colour around your shape. There's quite a lot of different presentation techniques that you can do, but this is a really simple one to give you an effective outcome. Now, this isn't a realistic shadow. That's a whole different ballgame. This is me putting an edge around my drawing just to give it a little bit of lift off the page. Okay, so don't feel like you're trying to create a shadow, because this isn't realistic at all in that sense. Okay, you certainly wouldn't have a shadow floating in the air, and I'm just going to give that a little bit of colour, bit of sketching. Now, if your drawing is terrible with wobbly lines and stuff, spend more time using your ruler. Don't spoil a drawing with a horrible bit of freehand that you're being careless with when you've done a really nice perspective drawing. Spend a bit of time getting that right. And what I'm not going to do on this drawing, as I very rarely do, I'm not going to bother rubbing my perspective lines out because they're fine. Okay, so that's, I'd spend a bit more time on that. I'd maybe put some texture on it. I'd probably show some wood joints. But that's 2-colour with 3-tone shading, light, medium and dark. And I think that gives us a reasonable 1-point perspective of a box. And you could spend some time, if you were designing your GCSE project or designing a small storage unit, you could start thinking about how you maybe divide it by putting drawer units in it, or shelving in it, or separating sections in it, or whatever. And once you've got one, again, at design college, what you quite often would do, you get all that time drawing one properly. If you then put a piece of tracing paper or a light piece of paper over the top of it, you can probably trace off elements of that for your next design. So getting one right is really worth the investment in time. Right, good luck with that. I hope that's worked for you.